The mind is a battlefield, and the greatest enemy you will ever face is the one that whispers in your own voice. The ego, your most loyal defender, your most cunning deceiver. It builds walls around your failures, dresses your wounds with arrogance, feeds you illusions of superiority just to keep you from seeing the truth. It tells you that you are above correction, that every mistake was someone else's fault, that you must always fight to be right, even when you are wrong. But the ego is not your strength. It is a mask. And if you do not learn to strip it away, to silence its endless demands, to wrest it before it ruins you, it will drag you into battles you never needed to fight. Pride has destroyed more men than war. Nations have crumbled because of rulers who refused to admit fault, who clung to their illusion of power even as the ground beneath them collapsed. Relationships have turned to dust because one or both sides refused to bend, convinced the compromise was weakness, that surrendering a point meant surrendering themselves. But true power is not found in being right. It is found in clarity. And clarity only comes when the ego is forced to kneel. When it is stripped of its armor, when it is exposed for what it is, a defense mechanism designed to protect not your growth, but your comfort. Modern society worships the ego. Look around. Social media feeds the delusion that every opinion is sacred, that self-importance is the highest virtue, that to be perceived is to be powerful. People live for validation, for applause, for the fleeting high of being seen, admired, envied. But the ego is never satisfied. No amount of likes will silence its hunger. No level of status will make it rest. It is insatiable, a parasite that convinces you that external validation is the same as internal worth. And so, you chase it. You build your life around it. You become owned by the very thing you believe gives you control. The strongest minds are the ones that have conquered themselves, not those who dominate others, not those who silence opposition, not those who force the world to bend to their will, but those who have silenced the endless chatter of their own ego. The ones who no longer need to be seen to know their value, who do not require approval to move forward, who can stand in a room full of doubters and feel no urgency to prove anything. That is strength. Not the loud kind, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that terrifies, because it is unmovable. In relationships, the ego is a wrecking ball. It convinces you that apologies are defeat, that emotional walls are protection, that vulnerability is a weapon that can be used against you. It demands that you always have the last word, that you always defend yourself, that you never show weakness. And so, you push people away. You choose to be right rather than be understood. You let your pride burn bridges. Let your need to protect yourself destroy the very connections that could have made you stronger. And when the dust settles, when the loneliness sets in, the ego tells you another lie. It was never your fault. The human mind is designed to evolve, but the ego is designed to preserve. It wants you to stay the same, to protect the version of you that already exists, to fight against change, because change is uncertain. But growth only happens when you let go of the need to be certain, when you accept that you do not have all the answers, that your instincts are not always correct, that your perception is not reality, but a lens distorted by your own experiences, biases, and insecurities. The moment you rest your ego, you see clearly for the first time. Think about the last time you truly listened. Not just waited for your turn to speak. Not just nodded along while planning your next argument, but really listened. How much more could you have learned if your ego had not been screaming over the conversation? How many relationships could have been salvaged? How many lessons could have been absorbed? How much wisdom could have been gained? But pride does not allow listening. It only allows defense. And as long as you are defending, you are not growing. Psychologically, the ego thrives on comparison. It does not care about actual success, actual progress, actual self-improvement. It only cares about being ahead of others. And so, you chase illusions. You measure your worth against artificial standards, against curated highlights, against people who are just as lost as you are, but have learned how to wear the mask better. And if you allow the ego to lead, you will never be enough. Because no matter how far you rise, there will always be someone above you. And that realization, that is what keeps most people miserable. So rest your ego. Let go of the constant need to be seen, to be right, to be admired, to be feared. None of it matters. None of it is real. Resting your ego will calm your soul, not in the way the weak interpret calmness, not as surrender, not as passivity, not as a retreat from power, but as a silence that grants absolute clarity. The war within your mind, the relentless tension, the hunger for validation, the need to be perceived as something more, all of it is fueled by the ego's addiction to control. And control, once understood, is an illusion. The more you chase it, the more restless you become, because the ego is never satisfied. It demands that you defend yourself even when no one is attacking. It whispers paranoia, forces you to prove your worth to people who were never worthy of your time. It convinces you that peace is found in being above others. But that is a lie. True peace is found in not needing to compare at all. Look at those who are never at rest, always trying to prove something, always waiting for a reaction, always feeding their identity through external approval. They have everything except peace. The world may see them as successful, dominant, powerful, but beneath the mask is a mind that never stops spinning. Every victory is fleeting. Every achievement dulls too quickly. Every high is followed by an unbearable low. That is the prison of the ego, the constant craving, the endless chase, the inability to just exist without needing to be acknowledged. But when the ego is rested, when its voice is silenced, when the need for external validation dies, something extraordinary happens. The mind finally exhales. In relationships, the ego is the silent assassin that ruins everything. It convinces you that you must always win, that vulnerability is weakness, that conceding is the same as losing control. And so, you hold on to grudges like they are trophies. You argue not to understand, but to dominate. You choose being right over being happy. But the moment you rest your ego, the war dissolves. You no longer react to every perceived slight. You no longer need to be the one who speaks last, who walks away victorious, who stands on higher ground. You realize that a relationship is not a battlefield. It is a mirror. And if your ego rules you, all you will ever see in that mirror is your own reflection, staring back, demanding more, never satisfied, never at peace. Psychologically, the ego creates a false sense of self, an identity built on defense mechanisms, on superiority, on a narrative where you are always the protagonist and everyone else exists in relation to you. It constructs an illusion so carefully that you begin to believe it is who you truly are. But what happens when you strip it away? When the need to be right, to be envied, to be feared, to be seen disappears? You finally meet yourself for the first time. And that moment, that stillness, that freedom from needing to be anything for anyone, is the moment your soul breathes again. The world fuels the ego's restlessness. Social media, status games, the obsession with perception, all of it is designed to keep you trapped in the loop of external validation. The more you feed the ego, the more the soul starves. And a starved soul? It is restless, anxious, desperate for meaning that cannot be found in applause. You see people chasing success, not for the love of mastery, but for the recognition it brings. They don't build for the sake of creation. They build so the world watches them build. And that is why they will never find peace. Because peace is not found in being seen. It is found in no longer needing to be seen at all. Look at the ones who radiate true power, the kind that does not demand attention, the kind that does not boast, the kind that does not require an audience to exist. They do not move for applause. They do not defend their every action. They do not explain themselves to people who are not worthy of an explanation. They have nothing to prove, because they already know who they are. That is the energy of someone who has mastered their ego, rather than being a slave to it. In relationships, friendships, power structures, the ego creates unnecessary conflict. It makes you paranoid, reactive, unable to hear criticism without feeling attacked. It forces you to seek enemies where there are none, to turn conversations into competitions, to mistake every disagreement as a challenge to your identity. But the moment you rest your ego, you realize something. Most battles do not need to be fought. Most arguments are not worth your energy. Most of the things that once sent you into a spiral of defensiveness do not deserve your reaction. And when you no longer react, you become untouchable. The ones who rest their ego see things others cannot. They hear words without attaching emotion to them. They observe rather than react. They do not waste time trying to convince fools to see their value. And in that detachment, in that silence, their power multiplies. They do not chase validation, so validation follows them. They do not need to prove their worth.